Today we're going to learn about the scientists of the cell theory. And one of the important parts when we look at this and the timeline is the invention of the microscope. The microscope is key to development of the cell theory. And we're going to start with Janssen. And he was a Dutch reading glass maker who was the first to put two lenses together in a tube to help magnify and look at objects that were very, very small. Robert Hooke is the next scientist we're going to look at, and what's important about him is he's the first one to call a cell a cell. Here's the type of microscope that he used, and you'll notice the addition. This is a candle, and it's the addition of light that improves his microscope so that he can see in what very small objects. And this is one of the pictures of something that he saw. He looked at the plant that's cork, and when he looked at it, he saw these very tiny little boxes. And the tiny boxes looked at rooms like in a church. And at that time, they called rooms in a church cells. So he used that term and was the first to call a cell a cell. So Hooke was, we call it a virtuoso, because he was able to contribute findings to the major importance of any field in science. He worked with scientists like Isaac Newton, Robert Boyle, and others. And he wrote a book called Micrographia, which details many of his observations. Next, we're going to look at Anton von Leeuwenhoek. And with his microscope, he was the first person to discover bacteria. And he actually called them animalcules. So Hooke succeeded in making one of the most important discoveries in the history of biology. He was the first who discovered bacteria. He discovered free-living and parasitic microscopic protists, sperm cells, blood cells, microscopic nematodes. And nematodes are a type of worm, rotifers, and much more. His research was widely circulated and opened up the entire world of microscopic life to the awareness of scientists. Schleiden, he was a German botanist, and a botanist is a person who studies plants. And this is where, if you notice, we've jumped a couple hundred years. He is the first person to recognize that plants are all made of cells. So he was the first to recognize the importance of cells as a fundamental unit of life. In his most well-known article, Schleiden described Robert Brown's 1832 discovery of the cell nucleus, in which he called a cytoblast. Schleiden knew that the cell nucleus must somehow be connected with cell division, but he mistakenly believed that new cells erupted from the nuclear surface like blisters. Even so, he made other accurate observations about plant cells and cell activity, and his conclusions marked the beginning of plant cytology. He was the first person to say all plants are made of cells. Now, he was friends with this gentleman, Theodor Schwann. And Schwann was a German zoologist, and as a zoologist, he studied animals. So Schwann and Schleiden were enjoying after-dinner coffee and talking about their studies on cells. It has been suggested that when Schwann heard Schleiden describe plant cells with nuclei, he was struck by the similarity of these plant cells to the cells he had observed in animal tissue. The two scientists went immediately to Schwann's lab to look at both slides. And together they created the one part of the cell theory in which all living things are made of cells. Virchow was a German physician, and he studied cells and was the first to discover that cells come from other living cells. So he was, every cell originates from another cell, was his landmark work in cellular pathology. and he studied a variety of phenomena with the human body, but he's most well known for stating that all cells come from other cells. So there we have the three parts of the cell theory. All organisms are made up of one or more cells, and the cell is the basic unit of all living things. All cells come from other cells. And that's the timeline of the development of the cell theory.